Hello and good morning, sir. So today we're going to present on the impact of COVID-19 towards economy of of our chosen country, which is Australia. Our group consists of 5 members, as stated. So here is the table of content for our presentation slides. So firstly, we go to the introduction. COVID-19 is a worldwide pandemic as declared by WHO. The quick spread of the coronavirus pandemic is wreaking havoc on financial markets, causing a global economic recession. Strengthened action measure implemented by government because of concern on health issue has bring this issue more critical because of and affect the economy. Thus, it give impact towards GDP and also industries. But then in this particular study, we focus on the construction, manufacturing, transportation, and tourism. This will be presented by next presenters.
Okay, so now we go to the gross domestic product of our country, our chosen country, which is Australia. Okay, so GDP is used to measure the country economies for its output and production. On last March, World Health Organization declared that coronavirus disease as a global pandemic, and it has been also affected the GDP. In the data analysis, it shows how much COVID-19 has affected the country and each industry in the country also. Okay, so for this data analysis, the GDP for Australia, it has dropped in 2 consecutive quarter, which is the first and the second quarter in December 2019 until September 2020. This is affected because of the continuous lockdown in Australia that affected the GDP. And the industry is also affected by the emergence of COVID-19 that lead to a drop in the GDP. And because this industry is contributed to the GDP. At the first, it was only a little drop when COVID-19 happened in the early stage, which is 0.3%. However, it started to have a lockdown in the middle of the month due to increasing of positive cases, and it was extended until around August or September of 2020. And due to this continuous lockdown, the GDP drops even more in the second quarter, which is 7.0% from the previous. In the table 2.15, the component that contributed to the GDP is also affected. And this is why the GDP is in the recession that time. Okay, next slide. For the construction industry, it shows a rapid decrease in the second quarter for about 7.59%, in which the stage where COVID-19 is prevalent. This is affected because of the restriction to complete the progress of the construction due to the lockdown, and it's also dropped as well as the nominal GDP. It's same as the nominal GDP because this mean that the construction industry is related to the GDP as for the material, worker and others. The pattern for the construction is similar to the GDP because the construction industry is affected during the COVID-19 pandemic when the lockdown has been announced. The restriction to complete the progress of the construction as well as buying material lead to the decreasing of the GDP. Okay, next slide. For the manufacturing industry, it's same as the construction industry as it showed a rapid drop on the second quarter for about 8.97%. It's also affected because of a manpower shortage, similar to the construction industry, to produce the output. And due to that, it's also reduced the output production. Thus, it will decrease the manufacturing output and the GDP will also decrease. That is why in the second quarter, it rapidly drops because of the shortage of worker, because they cannot go to work due to the lockdown. So they cannot make output, and the deficiency to pay the worker wages also cannot pay to the worker. Besides, household consumption also play a role in this industry because they are the one who consume the goods. So it shows in the data analysis that the household consumption dropped in the second quarter. So that means the lesser the consumption, the lesser the production. However, in the third and fourth quarter, it slowly recovered the industry as Australia has made a strategy to grow the manufacturing industry back. Okay, next slide. For transport industry, the latest data that has been published for GDP is only for New Zealand. And from September 2020 to March 2021 is already increased at the fourth quarter. This is because the productivity of transportation decreased during the occurrence of lockdown, such as public transport and flight, because people cannot go out. So the productivity of the transport industry is decreased. Okay, next slide. And lastly, for the tourism industry, it recorded a decrease from the previous year, which is 18.9% decrease. This is because the closing of the Australia border and the productivity of tourism industry decline. And due to the closing of Australian border, so the export and import of the country that contributed to the GDP is also affected. Besides the restriction to board a flight, the absence of tourists, lack of booking accommodation, travel agency, and many more is affected because of this pandemic. Moreover, the consumption of the visitor also give impact toward the tourism industry as visitor buying goods from the Australia. Thus, this will affect the country economy as well as the GDP of this country because this country is depending on the visitor from the other country. Okay, so I'll pass to the next person.
So the COVID-19 outbreak has given impact to the Australia construction industry. This is because there are many important aspects of construction is affected. However, the Australian government take a fast and effective ways to solve the problem. Australia keeps their construction sector ongoing unlike other countries because of the priority of their national economics. So for the data analysis, the first one is on the financial performance. Based on the table, the survey done by the Master Builder Australia interpret that the most significant percentage answer is yes, because the answer believe that they will face an increase in cost. The delay of supply chain will affect the cash flow of a contractor, especially if the payment will be paid after the completion of a work. Many of the contractors have this issue because they cannot proceed and commence any work, especially when the government begins strict lockdown. Thus, the companies will face loss due to the delay happen as time is money. Next is on the employment. Based on the table, the pandemic has resulted the number of job vacancies decreased steeply than any previous downturns. In 2020, the total employment work in building and construction industry declined by 4%. The implement of social distancing to workers by the Australian government can cause the shortage of workers. Moreover, the employment of works also increased because some of the workers had been fired because of the company or the firm cannot afford to pay their workers. So the third one is on the productivity of a project. Based on the table, the total construction had fluctuate from July 2018 until July 2019. However, the percentage increased in January 2020, then in July 2020, which the pandemic has been started, the percentage decreased significantly. This data is gathered from Australia Bureau of Statistics. The productivity is a very important aspect to a construction project. This is because the contractor will not fulfill or accomplish their work if the system of work is not productive. Due the productivity of a project due to the impose of standard operating systems such as social distancing, additional inspection, work fatigue, also give a deteriorated to the productivity. So some of the construction needs more people in the same time to make sure the work finish in good conditions. So for plants and equipments, the maximum use of them must be imposed to make sure of their productivity. The last one is on the disruption of supply chain affected by COVID-19 outbreak. This pandemic affect the completion date of a project because of the delays contractor to obtain any fabricated goods, plants, and equipment from countries that affected by the COVID-19 like Indonesia and China, which the country have shut down their industry and shipping service. So this outbreak does not impact only to one country, but most of countries around the world. Because of this, the countries which are always import construction material like China or products that are manufactured only by these countries like air conditioning or lift also will affect the construction of other countries if those countries have a lockdown. Thus, the contractor does not have any alternative ways, but they have just to wait. That's all from me.
Okay, so then we move on to the impact of COVID-19 on the manufacturing industry. So the first one is impact on manufacturing industry in case of employment. So here, based on the graph of COVID-19 stifled the manufacturing jobs recovery. So as you can see here, when the COVID-19 2020 at the second quarter, it seemed the declining of jobs recovery. That means the employment in manufacturing industry is dropping a lot in COVID-19. So in manufacturing industry, they estimated that between the first quarter and the second quarter of 2020, manufacturing lost in average 50,000 jobs in the second quarter according to this graph, and it is equivalent to the numbers of that job that being recovered during 2015 to 2020. So then we move on to the impact of COVID-19 towards manufacturing industry in payroll and wages. Okay, so according to Australian Taxation Office ATO data payroll jobs in manufacturing industry, here we can see the percent changes in every sector under manufacturing industry. As we can see, the percent changes in manufacturing industry is declining in almost all sector except chemical products. Why? Chemical products was increasing by 6.8%, meanwhile the other sector was declining. Why did this happen? Because the demand of products under chemical production is higher than others. Because as we can see, COVID-19's outbreak make people demand on the hygiene things. So it was under chemical production, such as for hand sanitizer, mask, and others. Then the third one, we move on to the output. So here, for measuring the output of manufacturing sectors, we use a PMI indicator. What means of PMI? PMI is Program Manufacturing Index, which means PMI is indicator that we use to see the trends of manufacturing sectors and services sectors. So as we can see here, it was used for manufacturing sectors. As you can see, the line blue of output and how to read a PMI. So PMI, we have a range from 0 till 100. So if PMI reading was below 50, it means the manufacturing thing, the thing that we measure is facing a contraction, And if the PMI was above 50, it was facing an expansion. So as we can see here, the output, manufacturing output is below 50, which is in around 43, is around 50 something, below 50. So that's mean output of manufacturing sectors was experienced decreasing. So then So this is the decline for industry production in Australia in year 2020. So as we can see, all sectors in manufacturing industry was declining in their output manufacturing. So, but the least decline is in food and beverage production, because even in COVID-19, the outbreak, people still demanded for food and beverage production. And lastly, we go to the business expectation. What it means by business expectation? According to the PMI of Future Output Index, business expectation for this manufacturing industry was declining in year 2020. So that's all from me. I will pass to the next presenter.
Next, I will present about transport industry. So basically, I will discuss on air travel and public transport. The first one is the data analysis of weekly spending in major airport dropping before travel bans. The effect
Kisha,
of COVID-19.
next slide, please.
The effect of COVID-19 on the airline industry can be seen in the graph in this figure. It shows that as soon as COVID-19 cases were registered worldwide, investment in Australia's major airport decreased. In February, there was a significant decrease in spending in Australia's main airport owing to travel bans and a drop in the number of foreign travelers as a result of the pandemic. Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, and Perth are the main airport. Only international travel is affected by this situation, as spending in smaller airport and remain relatively stable during this period. Next slide, I will present data analysis on public transport, which is Southeast Queensland public transport usage during COVID-19. On February 9, there was a significant decrease in light rail and ferry use, with almost 81% on the graph, while the bus and rail were used more. Passengers used bus, train, and light rail facilities in the days following the 9th of February until almost the middle of March, following a similar pattern. Due to government orders, passengers did not favor public transportation from the second half of March to the 5th of April. Next, I will pass to Wajdi.
We go to the tourism industry of the. So I'm gonna explain on the impact of COVID-19 towards tourism industry. So firstly, this first data shows that the total visitor spend in Australia being compared 2019 with 2019 and 2020. Alright, so on the yellow line, we can see that 2018 and 2019, in December quarter to March quarter, there's an increase as the period is peak seasons for Australia tourism industry because of many tourists from China celebrate their Chinese New Year in Australia. Therefore, the increase of the visitors increase the total visitor spend, and of course when on the next quarter the amount back to the normal. But then in 2019 and 2020, we can see there is a decrease on the December quarter to March quarter. This is because before COVID-19 happened, Australia has a bushfire crisis which occurred before the COVID-19, but it is not the impact is not significant as COVID-19 because we can see here at the March quarter to June quarter, this significant instant decline is because of COVID-19, because of the movement control order and also the closure and of the border, international border closure. Yeah. Next. Alright, so next is on the tourism consumption. Also compared 2018 and 2019 with 2019 and 2020. Briefly, the most affected product is transportation, which is down by 25%, from 44.8 billion to 33.5 billion. And then on the second stage, on the second product, the most affected is a travel agent and information, travel agency and tour operator services. down by 21%, and followed by recreational, cultural, and gambling, down by 19.3%, from 8.6 billion to 6.9 billion. All right, so but that's not all tourism consumption is decreased significant, as the education services show a modest decline, because most of international students stay in the Australia. Next. So on the export and import, the import, firstly, the import is based on the amount of money spent by Australia while traveling abroad, and export is based on the amount of money spent by international tourists on product and services. But then, because of COVID-19, the movement control order, the restrictions happens, then the export and import, of course, decline, because there is no activities of tourism happen. Next. So on the employment, we can see here that the graph on the June 2020 shows a slight decline. But then this latest employment data analysis being given by the Bureau Australia of Statistics stated that this graph is underrepresent. On what basis? Because of the firstly is because the data is an average fiscal year, and then many tourism workers lost their job, but they are still using the payment of the of their employer to in job seeking. That's all from tourism industry.
For the conclusion, okay. This research study investigate the impact of COVID-19 pandemic toward the Australia country. So for GDP of Australia is slowly recovering for some sector, meanwhile tourism and transport sector not fully recovered yet. Next is construction industry, only affect in early pandemic because the government take an effective act. Manufacturing industry open more chances for Australian government to plan and make strategy for the future. Transport industry, the aviation sector has huge losses and has a long time to stabilize the economy of the company. Lastly, tourism industry, after this crisis is over, it takes time for tourists to regain their previous mobility because of fear and anxiety. So that's all from us. Thank you.